Welcome to day 3 of the Tableau Conference 2016. My name is Amy. I'm a product manager at Tableau, and I am a hopeless romantic. Day 3, you made it. You're in the session on parameters, so I hope that's where you want to go, because that's where we're going, to parameter land. And you may be wondering, what are we going to do in parameter land? We're going to define and use parameters in all sorts of ways. You'll see examples of exactly what makes a parameter tick, and you will see the advantages and limitations of parameters in Tableau. My goal is, whether you knew what a parameter was when you walked in the door, when you walk out, when you leave, you are ready to parameterize your data. And maybe you'll even develop that special feeling that I have developed for parameters. You know, love sometimes happens when you least expect it. To set expectations, some of this content was carried forward from a parameter session last year that I also gave. And there's also some stuff that's different. So if you were here last year and some of this looks familiar, that means you were paying attention last year. So good for you. Before we get going, I have a question for you. Do you remember the first time you saw a parameter? How it made you feel? I do. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was Friday night. I'm home, alone, lonely. I'm hungry, but I don't want to cook, because it's no fun cooking for one. So I'm on the computer, as usual, looking for love. Where was I looking? Right here. Free training videos on Tableau.com. Have you been to this site too? So many intriguing options. This is the one that got me. Let me show you. Pretty innocuous, right? Shipping cost on the y-axis, profit on the x-axis. I'm looking at orders. And there's a soothing narration in the background, a voice. Blah, 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 blah. What? Watch it again. When the shipping cost is $50, there's all these blue marks and the line is lower. And when it's 250, orange marks and the line is higher, and they move together. They're together. Look, I'm older than I appear. My background in visualizations is very paper-based. I don't know if you can relate. So to see a visualization respond interactively like this, it was magical. I was hooked at first sight. Obviously, I downloaded the workbook and I started to unpack it. And I learned that those changes were in fact controlled by this shipping cost cutoff card in the upper right. This parameter control. Parameters is such a beautiful name. Well, one thing led to another, and I couldn't help myself. Have you done that too? It's embarrassing, isn't it? I was captivated and needed to learn more. So I spent the rest of the evening Googling Tableau parameters. And I'm going to show you quickly some of the basic examples that I found. So in this example, we're looking at sales by product for coffee. I love coffee. And there's only 5 marks in the view, but if you look over here in the upper right, there's this parameter control. And as I change the value, I get more or less marks. So I can filter my view based on the most important or the least important things using this top N parameter. And I learned how that's actually set is in the filter dialog on the top tab. I can filter by top, and here in this drop down, I can choose any existing parameter, or I could even create a new parameter. So that was exciting. And then I learned you can define sets exactly the same way. Over here, this top N sets, it also has a top tab and an option to enter a parameter in a drop-down or create a new one. It's like right there in the UI. It's in the dialog. And when I change the value of this top N parameter, I get more or less colors, so I can color by parameter. And then I noticed something really interesting, which is notice right now the value of this parameter is 9 in the upper right. And when I go back to this other sheet, it's 9 there too. So parameters, they know about each other. It's shared across the workbook. It's amazing. Maybe you've seen the variable bin size example. Similar concept. Through the UI, I can set the bin size when I'm looking at distributed data like this. And as I change the size of the bin, I can understand the skewness of the distribution better. And then I saw this example, this what-if analysis. We're looking at sales over time, superstore sales, which is my favorite. And the gray line is the actual sales, and the orange line is some what-if value. And there's a parameter there named what-if. And as I change the value of this parameter, the orange line moves. And so I can quickly ask and answer a question like, well, what if my sales was 50% higher, right? Then I would end up here. That would be good. Higher's good. So I spent the night Googling parameters. And I saw some examples like this and some other examples we won't show. And then I found this. Parameters online dating profile page. Look at the beautiful face. Those green eyes, I'm a sucker for green eyes. Sticking its little calendar tongue out in its picture. Tableau parameter, control freak seeks data lover for sweet interactive exploration. I'm a data lover. You don't have to be flexible because I am. Hobbies and interests include playing with data, which is one of my favorite things. Stretching, okay? Making balloon animals, what's not to love? I had a dilemma. I wanted to reach out, but I was already obsessed. And I didn't want parameters to know how much I liked them. So, should we have dinner? Should we have lunch? No, it could be really lightweight. So I wanted to contact me or swipe right, as the kids say. Someone had to tell me that. So we met for coffee. I could tell parameters liked me right away. They kept bragging about being flexible and enabling end-user input and control. I tried to hide that I was impressed, but I'm transparent. When parameters said, I can smooth out your trend line, I got tingles. I'll show you. Here we're looking at the sales over time, again, for Superstore data. And I have two lines right now. I have the actual sales and then the sales that's computed using the built-in quick table calculation for moving average. And by default, that moving average, it's calculated in an increment of -2. So it takes the second previous, the first previous, and the current value and averages it by default in Tableau. But you may have noticed already, I already have this parameter control over here. Maybe I want to allow an end user to choose Well, what increment of value do you want to look at for the moving average? And I've already entered some values, 7, 14. These are kind of date-related values. And so what I want to do is put this parameter into that calculation, right? So let's do that together. What I'll do is I'll just grab this existing measure on measure values and drag it over to the measures pane. And I'm going to name it moving average. By the way, as we go through the rest of the day, I'm going to try to name things based on their example because I get really confused super easily. So there's my moving average calculation for the moving average example. And I can open it up, and there's that exact same calculation here, but now I can see the whole thing. And so all we need to do in order to involve the parameter in this view is change this 2 here to the parameter. You notice that Tableau automatically inserted the fully addressed name. So when I do have things that are named the same, a calculation that's named the same as a parameter, I want to make sure to include that parameter's prefix, but it did it automatically for me, but it's purple. So the point is parameters are purple, and that's good. Watch as I apply this calculation. The view underneath, the red line is going to smooth out. And now I can make sense of the cyclic patterns in my trend more easily. That's thrilling, isn't it? So parameters can help me analyze my trends over time like this. They're so smooth. But when I realized what had just happened really, my heart pounded like, because up to this point in my Googling, most of my experiences involved hooking up a parameter directly in a form in the tool. With the top-end filters, I go to the top tab. With the sets, I go to the sets tab. With the bins, there's a drop-down when I edit the bin. And here what we did is we actually connected a parameter through a calculation. So I can connect parameters and have them influence the view by putting them in calculations, which means I can use them anywhere a calculation goes. This is flexible. They weren't kidding. Then parameters told me about field swapping. I'll show you this one. So here we're looking at sales by category, simple view, furniture, office supplies, and technology. And I'm building this viz for someone else to consume. And so I've given them sales, but maybe they'll want to look at profit, or maybe they'll want to look at discount, or maybe they'll want to look at quantity. So how can I let them choose what they want to look at? Parameters whispers, I can help. Of course you can, parameters. You'll notice in the lower left, I've already created a parameter called field swap. And I already added it to the view in the upper right. And it has 2 values right now. It has sales and it has profit. And so what I want to do is take whatever that value is, and I want to put it up here on columns and rows, because I can do that with a parameter. So to help us out and help us move quicker, I've created the field swap calculation. And let's take a look at it. So what this calculation does is it compares the value of the parameter that I just showed you to some text. And when it's sales, when that text is sales, it says return the sales measure, and when that text is profit, it returns the profit measure. So based on my selection of the parameter, it's going to return either sales or profit. So all I need to do now is go ahead and drag this field on top of sales. And there it is. It's in play. And watch as I change it. Profit, sales. So I can give users the ability to control which measures they're looking at. And if I want to be even more helpful, I can actually insert the name of the parameter into the text title of the worksheet. So I'll do that. So now I know what I'm looking at. And I can even add it to the tooltip. So I can go over to the tooltip, and here where it explicitly says sales now, I'll just go ahead and insert whatever that parameter field value is. Now when I tooltip over the view, I'm looking at profit. Well, that's good, it's making sense. I look at sales, and now it says sales. So one thing people often want to do is actually put the name of that parameter right here on the name of the axis. That would be helpful, wouldn't it? Today in Tableau, that's not supported. Right now, the title is pure text, and it doesn't take calculations. But we know about this, just so you know. And there is a workaround, which is to float a text object over that label, and then put the parameter value inside of the text object. But this field swapping thing, it goes even further. I was actually sitting next to a customer on the plane here, and they were sharing with me how they're using parameters. And one thing they showed me was, in a semi-self-service environment where they want to give people some level of control, but maybe not all the levels of control to build views, they use field swapping in a pivot builder way. So what you'll notice is that each of the dimensions here, it's just a parameter. And this right here, this is a parameter as well, this measure. And they publish these views out to users, and users build pivot tables based on what they want to see. Maybe I don't want to see ship mode, maybe I want to see segment. And so users can build out the tables that they want to look at. So I thought that was interesting. There's one more thing parameters can do in terms of swapping or switching. So not only can you swap out measures or dimensions in the view, thereby adjusting the view, but you can actually use parameters to change the sheet in a dashboard. So I've got one zone here, and using this swap sheet parameter on the upper right, I can change it from the bar to the map using a parameter. This takes advantage of the variable layout control on dashboards, and it's well documented, so I'm going to invite you to go look for it. So as you can tell, parameters and I, we spent a lot of time together, and I couldn't help the feeling that I was falling in love. I mean, we've already seen so much cool stuff. You can probably guess what happened next. I took parameters home. One thing led to another, and I got intimate that night with all sorts of ways parameters can be used interactively. The list on the left, these are what I would call kind of basic examples that are super well documented in the community. And the ones on the right were actually the examples covered in the Zen presentation at conference this year. I believe it's called Dashboarding on the Edge of Impossible. So if you're interested in those, definitely catch that session when they publish the videos later. These are the ones we're not going to talk about. We're going to talk about these today. These are, this is a list of some very special moments that I've shared with parameters, or that customers have told me they've shared with parameters, that turn out to be extremely useful. And as you review the list, you'll notice, there's a lot of them, so we're going to go a little bit faster as the presentation proceeds. But also notice that the first two at the top, the cross-data source filtering and the highlighting, are kind of gray. The reason for that is because we found that so many people were using parameters to support these two specific scenarios that we actually just added them as features to Tableau 10. So today with Tableau 10, you can do cross-data source filtering, and you can do highlighting without needing to use a parameter. So what parameters allow us to do is build a lot of interactivity. And these are specific scenarios where that can come in very handy. Oh, I wanted to mention, how many of you saw the Devs on Stage keynote on Tuesday night? And do you remember the filter presets? So setting the preset value of a filter to a default value. That's kind of like the third one from the bottom. So you can see we're investing in making some of this interactivity we know you want native to Tableau as well. Let me take you on a trip down memory lane. First, we'll visit a few of my favorite dates with parameters. In this scenario, you want to be able to give your users the ability to drill up or down in a view without actually having to update the view, right? We don't want to make users go in and edit this. We want to just give them a control where they can choose, I want to see year, month, week, or day, level of detail. And this is possible with a parameter. So, and we'll do that together. So here we're looking at sales by region, and it's by order date. And so you can see each of the regions, Central, East, South, and West on the left. And you may have noticed we've already built this date drill down parameter, and it's already been added to the view on the upper right. And I gave it these values, year, quarter, month, week, and day, intentionally, because those are the strings that the date trunc function in Tableau knows what to do with. So if I pass it a date and I say month, it's going to truncate the date to the month. If I pass it a date and I say week, it'll truncate the date to the week value of the date. So what we want to do is wire this thing up so that when it changes, the level of detail of the view changes. How are we going to do that? Calculated field, perfect. So all we need to do is involve the parameter in a calculated field and then bring the calculated field into the view. I created this date drill down dimension already, so we'll edit this and zoom in. Oh, here's the calculation for my darling clumsy typer. Thanks, parameter. You know me so well. So again, using this date trunc calculation, I just pass whatever that string value is in the dropdown on the right, and I pass it the order date, and Tableau will return the date truncated to that detail. So when I apply this, and then I bring this into the view, and I'm going to be tricky and use the Alt key so that I can select I want it continuous. The viz, you may have noticed the viz updated. So now I'm looking at the week level of detail. I could look at the year level of detail to see kind of like the broadest overall trend. I could say, I want to know the day by day, nitty gritty, show me what's going on. Or I could be somewhere in the middle and look at how are my regions performing by month. There's another thing we can do. We can actually So we can control the level of detail of the viz with a parameter. We can also control the order of the rows in the view. So we'll start right where we left off, but this time what we're going to do is we're going to wire up a parameter to specify the sort order of the regions in my view. Why might I want to do this? Well, maybe this user is from the southern region, so their data should be at the top, and so I want south at the top. Or maybe another one is from west, so don't go all the way to the bottom of the view, just put west at the top. So what I want to do is create a parameter that's based on the region, and then specify the sort order based on the value of that parameter. To do that, one of the ways you can create parameters in Tableau is from the dimension itself. I can use the create parameter option here. And when I do that, the parameter is going to be automatically populated with the values in the field at the time that I create it. And this is an important distinction because if that field updates, the parameter is not going to update. It has the list at the time that I created it. And we're going to talk about that a little more later. But if you have a long list and you want to quickly get started, you can use the field itself to generate the list of values for the parameter. So you can see I have central, south, west, central, east, south, and west, and that's what we want, so we'll choose OK. And I forgot to rename it, but we're going to go with it anyway. I can go ahead and show this parameter control. And there's central, east, south, and west. And so now, when I change the value, it doesn't do anything because it's not involved in the calculation, right? So I need a calculation to consume it. So we'll go ahead and create that calculation. And I'm going to call it region, sort order. And what I'm going to say is, if the region parameter is equal to the region in the view, then return 0, else return 1, end. So it's a simple comparison calculation. I choose apply. And now I want to bring the sort order into the view so it actually affects the view. So I'll do that. First, I'll go ahead and change this to a discrete field. And then I will drag it into the view with my Alt and select the attribute because I am not interested in aggregating on this. And now you can see the southern region is at the top. And if you look over at the region parameter on the right, it says south, and when I change it to central, it says central, and when I change it to east, so it's working. Parameters work so good. And I can go ahead and take it one step further and just hide that 0 and 1 because that's not meaningful. And so that's how I can use parameters to control the sort order of a view too. But we were on date drill down, right? And so we used the date trunk function to drill up and down the level of detail of the view. And then we even sorted it because we knew that would be helpful. Another date parameter and I have been on a few times is the year-over-year calculations scenario. So in reality, when you do a year-over-year calculation, oftentimes you don't want to look at all the years, right? Because what are you going to do about 5 years ago or 10 years ago? You want to look at this year. So you want to look at 2016. And so what do? You go and you create a view. And so you have your profit, and it's broken down by year, and then within that month, so you can see profit for 2013 by month, profit for 2014 by month, profit for 2015, et cetera. And so what we want to do is ask the question, what is the year-over-year growth of my profit for 2016? So I go ahead and I start by just taking advantage of the built-in quick table calculation. Oops. Unintentional click there because it's built in, so I don't have to do that. And I'm going to choose the year-over-year growth calculation. And when I do that, Tableau automatically looks to the last year and does some math and shows me the growth. And so 2013 is blank, indicating that I don't have any 2012 in my data set, so this is reassuring. Parameters is very reassuring. So now, since we want to look at 2016, obviously all I need to do is go ahead and filter by 2016. But what happened? I filtered out 2015. You saw me do it. I said 2016, and it said, OK, 2016. But I need 2015 to do the year-over-year calculation. Oh, come on. How am I going to do this? You can use me. Ooh. Tingles. So we can use a parameter, right? We're in the parameter session, so that was probably an obvious segue. So instead of filtering out by 2016, instead we're going to use this year-over-year parameter that I've already created in the lower left. And of course, I already added it to the viz to save time. And it just has the values 2016, 2015, 2014, 2013. And then I have a calculation here to consume that parameter. And let's take a look at this calculation. Oh, parameters, I love you more. God, you're so sweet to me. And what this calculation says is it's actually two parts, right? So first of all, if the year of the row is equal to the year of the parameter, then return the index for that row. And Then it says, is the index of the row returned? Okay? And that's what that calculation says. And so when the year of the row is equal to the year of the parameter, the index will be true, and when it's not, it'll be false. I can go ahead and choose OK. And now what I need to do is just bring my year over year into the view. But again, I want to filter now, right? I don't want to draw something. So I'll drag year over year to filter. And remember, we want 2016, which is currently selected. Well, we want the value of the parameter, I should say. So I'll select the true rows and choose Apply. And now you can see the year over year growth for profit for 2016 only, or for 2015, or for 2014. So parameters allow me as an end user to enter what I want to look at and adjust the view accordingly. Another way people often do this with dates, and I mentioned that we showed the preset dates in the Developers on Stage keynote. And the problem is that when you actually create a filter and you set it to a date, like today, that date is literally saved in the file format. That's how it works. And so when I come tomorrow, the value for today is yesterday. But I want it today because it's today. I said today, give me today. So obviously parameters can help us solve this problem. We'll look at a few examples really quick. I think I forgot to open it. Oh, sorry, I'm going to the wrong file. Spacing out, getting distracted easily. So in this example, I've created a default date parameter in the upper right. And what I've done is populated it with some meaningful date type values like today, or yesterday, or last week. And I can consume that in a calculation. Okay, and all it does is it says we've already done this together, except this time we're using the date add function. Based on that value, return the date. And then I go ahead and filter by that date in the view in the filter definition here. Okay? So this is one thing people do often, right, is try to control the default date of the filter that's applied to the view. And actually, a number of customers have said, well, what if I want to have two dates? And so you can do that with parameters as well. In the upper right, you'll see I have the date range start and the date range end values. And I can save and publish this view and share this with customers, and I can invite them to specify specifically what date they want. And so they do that. They're like, well, I don't want July 1 of 2013. What I want is July 1 of 2014. And this happens. And this is where I realized parameters, they're not perfect, right? Because I can't enforce that the beginning date, one parameter called beginning date, is less than the parameter called end date, right? I can't enforce that yet in Tableau. And so, I had to sit down and talk to parameters about this. Parameters have, a couple problems that I don't like. I want to be able to enforce that one parameter knows about the other. Or I want to, why can't I multi-select values in a parameter? Or if I create you from a field in my data source, why can't you update when my data source updates? And Parameter and I had a serious talk. We had counseling, It was one of those, are we going to go on, or was that good, and, peace out. And I've actually never listened so carefully to Parameter, right? I really wanted to know who is Parameter. On the surface, Parameter has many different faces. You see examples on the screen, the single value list, compact list, slider, Boolean, type in, date. These are all controls, the faces of a parameter. And this is how parameters communicate. You know, communication is essential to relationships, I've heard. As an end user, I make a selection through this control, and based on that selection, parameter does something. And each of these, although they allow for different types of selection, they have one thing in common, right? One thing is that parameters only hear one value at a time. So you can only single select with the parameter. But who is parameter underneath? You know, like really, like from their upbringing. Well, fundamentally, parameter is just basically a variable. I should clarify, Tableau didn't make up parameters, the concept, right? And I clarify that because I had a customer ask me why we called them parameters, and I was like, I don't know, someone was too drunk one night to call it something better. I'm just kidding, of course, right? Parameter is a programmatic concept that is used in lots of different products and programming languages and things like that. And parameters in Tableau work a specific way. They work similar to how X works in this equation. So in this equation, by virtue of being in the equation, we know some things about X. We know that X is not bananas, right? We know that it's not race cars. It has a specific data type. And I've already mentioned X can have one value, right? We're not in imaginary number land, okay? So the parameter can be a single value, and it has a specific data type. And it's defined at the time that you define the parameter. And the list that you define the parameter values to be, those are stored in the file format. And that's actually an advantage. So because we store the list of possible values for a parameter in the file format, that has the benefit of supporting really great performance, because we never have to do a query or a lookup to populate that list of values. So it doesn't require any external queries. So parameters and I had these conversations, and we've really having this kind of language of love conversation, like, well, who are you and how do we work together? And I arrived at this framework. And actually I arrived at this framework because Wilson Poe suggested this framework a couple of years ago. So I want to definitely give him credit for thinking about it this way. Parameters are singular in value. They have a consistent data type. They're user-defined, so you can require user input. And they're generally static in nature, meaning that when you create them, the list of possible values for the parameter is the list that you created that with, unless you go in and manually change it. Now listen, I had to come to terms with the strengths and limitations of parameters. You know, I want everything, but in relationships, there's compromises. And I really thought deeply about, well, okay, you're not perfect, but what do you make possible? And what parameters does make possible in the implementation today is providing control for end users to select the data that they want to see and affect the view based on their analysis and questions. Consider if you couldn't do that we would have to basically presume all of the possible questions that the users are going to ask, generate the underlying data structures, data stores to support the possibility of that question, and then expose that to the users. So parameters give us control as end users to ask different questions and flexibility. And I've already shown you a bunch of ways that parameters can be used, and we're going to look at even a few more. So we're in a timeout, and I'm wrestling, and really, to be honest with you, I started to feel lonely again. And I grew to miss parameters. And no one's perfect, and I do want flexibility and control, and I want to play around. So I called first. I couldn't help it. How are you doing? I miss you. I miss you too. And we talked it through. And I have to say, at that point, that was when our relationship really started. right? Like now we know who we are, let's play. So I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite analysis examples with parameters. The first one comes by way of Mark Reeder, who is at Tableau Jedi on Twitter. I think he's employee number single digit something something. And this is one of his favorites. It's called compare to selected. So sometimes when you're delivering an analysis, you want to give users the ability to specify what they want to compare all the other values to, okay? So you want them to be able to choose the baseline value that they're going to do their comparison with. And we call this compare to selected, and it'll make more sense when we build it. So here we're looking at sales by subcategory. And let's say I own copiers. Like, I want to know how copiers is doing relative to everything else, right? Like, don't make me do the math, just show me the number. And so what we want to do is provide a parameter where I can select the subcategory, and based on that selection, recalculate the difference from my value. And so we'll do that with parameters now. I'll go ahead and use this existing field to quickly create the list that the parameter values can have. And I'll choose OK. And then down here in the lower left, my parameter was added, so I'll go ahead and show it in the view. And so you can see that the creation works. Again, it's very helpful. But it still doesn't do anything. And so I need to consume it. But we're going to consume it in a new way, a way we haven't seen yet. Remember that what I want to do is see the difference from a value. So on my sum of sales pill on columns, the green pill, I'll go ahead and choose the difference built-in quick table calculation. And you can see the view is updated to reflect the table calculation there. And this is also reassuring, right? So how is it being calculated? It's being calculated down the table. So the difference of phones from itself is 0. So that's good, because if I subtract phones from phones, I hope it's 0. But we can specify it. Well, actually, what do I want to use to calculate that difference? So back on the measure, it's using the table right now. And I could choose cell, although I don't have cells really. Or I could choose subcategory. And that's what we want. I want to be able to say, compare it to subcategory. And so I choose subcategory. And then what I need to do is say, well, which subcategory? And once I've chosen subcategory, I can explicitly choose a specific one. It could always be accessories. It could always be appliances. It could always be art. But since I have the compare to selected parameter, at the very bottom, you see that? That's my parameter. So I can say, compare it to the parameter. I'm going to tell you what to compare it to. Check the parameter. And so when I do that, remember it's on labels right now. We expect to see labels go to 0, and it does. So I can use parameters to allow end users to specify what they want to compare differences from. And again, this is one of Mark Reeder's favorites. Another comparison is what I call compare to reference state. Were you at the Vision keynote on Tuesday morning? Okay. A few people. I want to sincerely invite you to watch the Vision keynote I think it's online right now. And we're laying out like our 3-year kind of direction, where we think we're headed. As part of that keynote, Andrew Beers showed the use of an index line. And of course, where we're headed is making this incredibly, first of all, let me show you what an index line is. What we're looking at right now is the 20-city composite housing prices over the last 10 years. And how this works is that I have a parameter compare to date. And you notice all of the lines join right here on this. All of the cities join on the line. And So what it's doing is it's calculating the growth relative to the date, and that date is the date of the line. And as I change the date, the view changes as well. Can you see the line moving? Hello? Thank you. Okay, so in the vision, we want to make this so easy. Like, why should I even have to do a calculation to do this or use a parameter? But for now, you can actually build this in Tableau with a parameter. So we'll build this together. We're looking at exactly the same data now, except, well, first of all, I haven't put the city on color. So here I have specified a city, and this is a parameter on the upper right. And I can go ahead and drag that city onto color, and immediately the color is applied to the parameter, the city specified in the parameter. So we're kind of near Dallas. So these are the housing prices. In red are the housing prices for the last 10 years in Dallas. Now, what I want to do now is go ahead and add a reference line. And I can do that by going to the analytics pane on the left and dragging out the reference line. And I'm going to put it on the effective date axis. So I'll just drop it here. And it's going to invite me to specify how the reference line is defined. And so right now the value is an effective date. But you see, I can create a new parameter right here. And so let's do that. I'll call the parameter compare to date. And I'll let it be all values. That way I get a calendar control. And I'm going to change the label as well. I'm going to change the label to the actual value. You can choose OK. And you see it added this compare to date parameter to my view automatically in the upper right. And it also added the line to the view with the date here. And as I change the date, let's say April 5th, the position of the line changes. But I'm not getting that growth, right? I'm not getting that intersection on the date of the index. And so what I want to do now is actually take that same parameter and use it in a calculation to return well, first thing I need to do is return the actual value. Let's talk this through. So first, I need to know for each city, well, what is the housing price on the date that intersects this line? And then to get the growth, I need the difference of the value, any other value from that date, right? And that's going to bring me to that intersection. So of course, I've created these beforehand. I want to index your dates on a line. So dirty. So I can use the built-in window max table calculation. And all this does, I know it looks long, and I get overwhelmed by long equations personally. So I'll break it down really quick. So what it does is it says, when the month of the effective date is equal to the month of the parameter, right? Then that's the value. And it goes through the entire window. And so what it's doing is plucking out the value as it crosses the line, as it crosses my vertical reference line. It's saying, that's the value I want. Now, it looks like I have some errors. And the issue is that I named my parameter differently. And now I'm valid. Oh, thank you. OK, so first thing we did is we just created the calculation to get each of the values for the 20 lines. And now I just need to take that and subtract that from all of the other values in the view. And that's what we do with this difference calculation. Super simple. I just say, give me the price, and then subtract that indexed value we just calculated. And then with that, I can do the percent difference calculation here. OK, and this is just like a 1 plus x minus y over y. It's like a growth calculation Hopefully it looks familiar. So let's go ahead and drag this into the view. And when I drop it on rows, watch what happens. The view is re-rendered according to the calculation, right? So like, parameters, come on. That's hot, I think. This is really hot. And I think you shouldn't have to use a parameter to do it, but you can. In the resources on this slide, you'll see the second resource. One of the Zen masters actually recreated a New York Times view of an index line, and went even steps further, right, in terms of customization of that view. So this will be available to you. So you can see parameters and I have been going out for a while, and we're getting ready to kind of take that next step in the relationship. Hey, we're going to travel together. That's serious business when you travel with someone. So now what I'm going to do is show you some of the places you can go with parameters. The first example we'll look at is what I call the landing page scenario. And these are things that customers have told us this is what we do. And in the landing page scenario, you have a bunch of values you want to collect up front. And then what you want to do is some calculations and processing. And then you want to deliver or navigate the user to an analysis page. So that you land them on a page, you get a bunch of input, and then you navigate them. Okay? And based on that input, you do whatever analysis or calculations you're going to do. So I'll show you this example really quick. So here I've just created a dashboard. And I'm only collecting a few values right here, but I can enter the region, the category, the start date, or the threshold. And then I have a nice little button here. And this is kind of a workaround, but you can build a little button like this in Tableau. And when I click it, it's going to take these 4 values entered and navigate me to an entirely different dashboard that uses South, office supplies, 313, and then that threshold is used here in the reference line. So those were the values that I collected in the landing page, South office supplies, 313, threshold. And then the user can navigate within desktop to this target dashboard for analysis. There's a little bit of a gotcha that I want to warn you about, which is that when you use this workaround to create this button, it's basically a filter action. Tableau will eat your first click, so sometimes you need to go ahead and click it twice. And that's really annoying, and I want to apologize about that and let you know that I personally think we need a navigation control. But this is a great workaround, and customers do this. It's not parameters' fault. Thank you. Have you been seeing parameters too? The next example that I'll show you really quick, the URL action parameters. So of course, you can use parameters in URL actions in Tableau. And you do this when you want to pass specified values to target sheets through the URL. And those sheets can be in Tableau, if you're interested in that. So here I've got a simple example. We're looking at sales by state on the top. And then I've actually have a web page in the bottom zone in Tableau. And I am using Wikipedia as my basically root for my URL. It doesn't have to be a parameter, but I did that. But what I do here is using the dashboard action. You can see that I'm taking that parameter, right? And then I'm actually coupling it with whatever is the state that the user selects. And then based on that, I'm going to navigate it within Tableau in this web page there. So let's say for California, and I made this a hyperlink, but you could make it on click or on hover like you can other actions. When I select the URL action for California, I get the Wikipedia content for California. And this is helpful when you want to add useful context to your view. So I've seen, Wikipedia I think is a good example. Sometimes different maps, audio or video, things like that, right? That's possible. You can also pass URLs, parameters through URLs like on Tableau server, so on online or on public or on server. And when you set the values of, when you set URL parameter values, remember parameters is not a Tableau concept. URLs have parameters, but you can set the values of filters in a view by passing a value to the URL parameter. So let's look at what I'm talking about. Here I've got one of the sample workbooks. And what I'd like you to pay attention to is on the left here, I have a region filter and a state filter. And right now, whoops, my bad. Right now, there aren't any parameters in the URL besides this weird double ID thing that we do. So I can use, like I said, you can specify the values of filters by passing values into the URL parameter. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to append to that URL. The region should be central and the state should be Texas, okay? And if I just copy and paste this, copy, hopefully I remember how to do that. Paste, there it is, and I hit enter. Now notice that the value of the filter is central for region, and it's state, it's Texas for the state. So you can obviously begin to imagine you can actually architect some data exploration and navigation experiences based on the data that the user wants to see. Going even further, if you are a programmer, you can actually set or read the value of a parameter, a Tableau parameter, programmatically using the JavaScript API. And so if you are in a server environment, this gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of what you want to do with those parameters. What I'm going to do is show you first the example. This very simple example here. It's a web page, and I have embedded one of the sample vizzes. And you can see right now the churn rate is 17.5. But when I load this page, what I want to do is set that churn rate to a different value. And using the JavaScript API, I do that when I initialize the viz. On the first interactive, I'm going to actually right here change that parameter value, churn rate, .1234, okay? And so then when I load the viz, what happens is I expect that that churn rate will change. And not only does it change, but I put a little alert in with some hugs and kisses. You're the best. I love you so much. Okay? And then the final example is that you can, of course, pass parameters back to your database backend through custom SQL. And I'll show you this, but I first want to caution you that when you use parameters with custom SQL, or not just that, when you do custom SQL, you kind of give up some of the performance optimizations that Tableau makes when we write your SQL for you, right? Because that's when you're doing, when you're dragging and dropping and stuff. So, you know, use it with caution, but also sometimes you really do just want to limit this number of rows that you're returning in your analysis, either for development purposes or even in production environments. So what does that look like? What that looks like, here's a view of dates. And this is literally from a date dimension table that I made up. It's got a bunch of dates in it. You can notice on the upper right, we're looking at November 1st through December 31st. And so I'll just change this from November 1st to December 1st. And the view will update to show me only December dates. And how that's working is, on the data source tab, I've created a custom SQL query. And in the bottom of the custom SQL query, I have inserted my parameter value for the from and the to date into the where clause of that query. Okay? So that's also possible. So we've reviewed a bunch of cases together. I want to let you know this is not meant to be an exhaustive list of the things you can do with parameters. There's a bunch of other stuff. Email me if you want to tell me about them or if you want us to consider including it in another year. I'm sure you'll discover other things. We're out of time, so I'll skip the examples in the wild and let you know that parameters and I, while in love, are not exclusive. I invite you to also play with parameters. Please, if you'll be around this afternoon and you're interested in the Tableau Public users and authors, they're super enthusiastic. Tableau Public is a great resource for learning how people are building fantastic vizzes. There's a Fanalytics session this afternoon about Tableau Public. This is the last session here, so thank you so much for being here on the noon hour of the third day. These are the related sessions. The first one was a hands-on training, so you probably won't be able to get that on video. The second one is an intermediate level session that contextualizes parameters in the context of all the other controls. The third one is that Jedi level session that I told you some of those advanced examples, super advanced examples were discussed in, so you can find those on the videos. I really value your feedback. Please take a minute to submit the survey. I'll read them all. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you for coming to conference.